All right. Hello, everyone. This is the first episode or lecture for internet broadcasting. To start with, I want to thank you all for coming the first week and having some great discussions. What we're going to be talking about in this first podcast really is just where podcasting started and kind of where it is today. So now that you know a little bit more about what a podcast is, we can start having the discussions about where it started and kind of how it came to be what we know as podcasting today. So podcasting has been around since 2004, so just over 10 years, which doesn't seem like a very long time. And it's not. It really isn't. But when we talk about technology, 10 years is a pretty lengthy amount of time. The technology for podcasting has been around since 2001, but it wasn't until 2004 when it became mainstream. And really where podcasting started through blogging, where people would have blogs with text and give information that way and deliver it through the internet that way. What they found is, or when I say they, I mean the two men that are credited with bringing podcasts to mainstream, Dave Weiner and Adam Curry. What they discovered is people want to take their information with them. We're not always sitting in front of our computer. We're not always, available to get the information or want to necessarily go out and have to find it. So that's where blogs came into play, where we could subscribe to something and then the content was delivered to us. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in future episodes as far as where it really did start and some of those details. But Dave Weiner, he's a software developer. Adam Curry is actually, or he was an MTV VJ for a while, and Adam was the one that really wanted to develop a podcast. He had information he wanted to deliver through audio. He teamed up with Dave, and he and Dave Dave made one of the very first podcast series. When the two of them got together, they developed what we know as the ability to subscribe and the ability to subscribe to audio files, most importantly. So what they did is they took an RSS feed, which RSS stands for Real Simple Syndication. That's a good acronym to know and get used to hearing. But what they did is they added a piece to it called an enclosure, and that enclosure allowed an audio file to be attached to a blog or attached within a website, so that now instead of just seeing text, now you get an audio file and you can download it and you can take it wherever you want. So podcasting as we know it today was brought forth because of these two guys, RSS and the almighty enclosure. So what I have in this example here is just an example of a RSS feed, which will look like complete gibberish to you guys right now, and that's okay. You won't really work with RSS feeds until you're in the advanced class, but I wanted to show you what it looks like. This is all XML based coding is what it is. It's like web coding, which unless you've done it before, this looks foreign, and that really is just fine. But what I want you to pay attention to is what I have highlighted describes one particular episode of a podcast. It talks about the date that it was published, very brief description, a title, but then there's an enclosure URL, and there's some information tied to that. Like I said, I'm not going to go too heavy into the detail with it, but that line of code that says enclosure and then all the information that's tied with it is really what made a podcast a podcast. So look for more RSS information at the end of the semester once we have a few more podcast tidbits under our belt. So what happens is this document, that document that I just showed you called an XML file, is created. And it's submitted to what we call an aggregator. And basically what happens is this aggregator cycles itself and recognizes when new content is available. So content becomes available, and then it pulls the audio file or the video file. I focus more on the audio side because they tend to be more audio podcasts tend to be more popular than video. But it pulls that file, and then it either sends it to you, automatically downloads, or just a simple notification saying, hey, something new is available. And that's really how RSS works. So whenever you see a subscribe button, or even the icon that's displayed right here, that's the universal icon for RSS. And it means you can subscribe and have the content delivered to you. And I guess really some people think, okay, well, I understand what a podcast is. I get it. But what really does make a podcast? Frequency is the number one thing. When you deliver content through podcast, through blogs, any RSS type of communication, you are delivering it on a regular basis. Your subscribers are expecting a podcast on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Whatever your frequency happens to be, whatever you decide that frequency is, that's what makes a podcast. If you post one today, and then maybe in 2 weeks you post another one, and then 2 days later you post a third one, you don't have a set frequency, and your subscribers don't know when to expect content. And they start to lose interest, especially if you don't do it on a regular basis. They're like, oh, well, maybe this week. No, not this week. Maybe next week. Yep. Oh, wow, I have 2 of them. I missed one somewhere in there. You confuse your audience that way. TV shows, think about that. TV shows are, often your sitcoms. They're a weekly sitcom at a specific time on a specific day of the week. Think about that with your podcast. You want to develop a frequency. Podcasts are audio video, which we kind of mentioned already. There's also one type of podcast, not as popular. We will actually utilize it during this semester with your big project, your My Shows, and that's called an enhanced podcast. It plays as a video, but it's not an actual video. It's just still graphics with audio. So audio video, or what we call an enhanced podcast, is really what you see. And of course, the last thing that makes podcasting is that it's portable. We can take it with us. I have a friend who lives in Boston, or she lives outside of Boston, but she commutes into Boston to work every day. And she said podcasting has just saved her sanity, really. What she does is she downloads all the content, so she's not using all the data, and she's on a train, so she doesn't always have the reception she would like. But she downloads it to her phone, to her iPod, whatever she's using, and then she listens to it on her commute in. So she's getting the content she wants when she wants it. And that's the cool thing about podcasting. That's what makes it exciting. So what I want to do is just kind of give you some information. Now, this information is current as of late 2013, early 2014. Couldn't find much more updated information or information that I believed was true from a reputable source. So this information is just to show you how popular podcasts are as of that time period. 27 Americans have listened to an audio podcast. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but think about this. 15% of Americans listen to podcasts on a weekly basis. That's 48 million people. So 15% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you say 48 million people listen to podcasts weekly, that changes your thought process a little bit. And some people don't even realize that they're listening to podcasts, and they are. They might not just do it on a regular basis. IT Conversations was actually the longest running podcast. It was one of the first podcast series. I want to say it was the third podcast series to be published. It started right around 2004, 2005 when podcasting became mainstream. They had 3,300 audio podcasts. It is still the second ever longest running podcast. And they created podcasts until December of 2012. And then there were some changes within the company from what I understand. So they just discontinued. And after 3,300 episodes, that's pretty good. That's a lot of IT information given in those few years. I mean, that's a good 7-8 years that was running. So that's a lot of great quality information that they delivered in a podcast series over that time frame. Now, another thing when we talk about podcasting is just everything podcasting is related to the internet. That's why we call the course Internet Broadcasting. And podcasting, what it did for the internet is it brought it forth to Web 2.0. Web 2.0 is, and we're kind of migrating into 3.0 right now, but really what Web 2.0 was for podcasting, or podcasting made Web 2.0 what it is the ability to communicate and have conversations, to be able to share information, to be able to socialize in ways that we didn't think were possible. It really did change everything. So podcasting did help the web migrate and progress to what we know as the internet today. And this is just a visual showing you all the different social outlets, and I can't even say all because obviously there's a lot more, but popular social outlets that have come forth because of that enclosure in an RSS feed and podcasting. So things to think about that are happening now, or happening recently since podcasting became available, is a lot of radio shows, and some of you know this already. You might not listen to radio, but a lot of radio shows started making their programming available as podcasts. There are, I can tell you, local radio stations that they take portions of their radio show and they make it available in podcast format. And you'll hear that through commercials and things that they do, or as they're talking, listen to us, listen to our podcast on this website, and so on. So a lot of radio shows have taken to podcasting in a huge way and use it as a huge tool because radio is changing. We don't listen to radio the way we used to, and they recognize that. So it started as early as 2005, 2006, and it's just picking up speed over the last 3 years. Now, a lot of the most popular podcasts, too, are public radio stations. Comedy is one of the biggest things for podcasting. Podcasting kind of hit a plateau right around 2011, 2012. And because more people started to take to comedy podcasts and more comedy podcast series came out, podcasts started to increase in popularity again. 2014 was known as the year of the podcast, and it was because of all of these comedy podcasts coming about. So ones like The Nerdist, or You Made It Weird, or WTF, those are some of the most popular podcasts that have drawn in a great audience and introduced them to podcasting. One random side fact is that Adam Carolla, he broke the world record for the most downloaded podcast ever. Over 59 million unique downloads from his podcast series between March of 2009 and March of 2011. So almost 60 million downloads in a 2-year period. And unique downloads means individual people. and not one person downloading multiple episodes. That's just unique downloads for a podcast. So it's kind of an interesting random little tidbit. So people starting in podcasting or students starting in digital media, they're like, okay, well, I want to do audio. I want to do video. Who really uses podcasts? Honestly, everybody, because podcasting is audio and video. So, and a lot of content is delivered through the internet now. If you do it at a regular frequency, anything you do in digital media could be turned into a podcast. Our internet radio station, we can take any radio show that is broadcast over our radio station, have it record as it's broadcast, and it downloads it, and we can publish it as a podcast. So it's kind of a cool thing. We can use it for education purposes. There's a lot of nonprofit organizations who use podcasts. Fortune 500 companies use it all the time it could be for promotional pieces. It could be internal. So there's a lot of different venues for podcasting, and it's because we want to communicate. I'll use an example. You're going to hear this again, so I apologize. But, for a while, Southwest Airlines actually had a podcast, and it was used internally. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're an airline, where are your employees? They're in the air. So because their employees are all over the place and they had content that they needed to deliver to their employees, they took to podcasting, distributed it internally, not for people on their general website or anything like that. But that way, people that were employed by Southwest, they could take out iPods, or they could get the information, download it to any of their media devices, and when they had time, when they were in between flights or whatever, they would listen to the information that was delivered by the company. So corporations use this all the time, and there's many different reasons for it. So I guess, why would you want to start a podcast? That's another question that I get quite a bit. And even though it plateaued for a little bit, it even dipped a tiny bit in that 2012, even 2013 timeframe, where the popularity decreased ever so slightly. But it's still continuing to grow. As people know and understand what it is, that popularity keeps increasing, and you become a leader in the market. If you have information that you want to get out there to people, why not be the first one to do it? And why not do it in a fun way or a different way than everyone else? And get above and beyond and have that edge over your competitors. Another thing that you do, and that last point says it, you're developing a library of content that's archived. Once you post it somewhere, it's archived. So if somebody's searching on the internet for some topic and one of your episodes happen to cover that topic, and they come across your podcast, and they listen to it and they like it, and then they realize there's more information here, they might subscribe to your podcast, even though they started listening to content that you put out there 2 years ago. It makes it discoverable. And if you keep it going for an extended period of time, it's that much more archived content for people to be able to discover your podcast. Now, this stuff will come up again in the future, but just to kind of give you a little bit of information as far as podcasts and how it's sometimes used for advertising, and think about this too, with how content was delivered or information was delivered and how it's delivered now. Internet ads actually surpassed radio in 2007. That, 2007 may or may not seem like that long ago, but for that time period, for internet ads and the popularity of internet ads to surpass radio advertising, that's crazy. Now, in 2006 alone, now remember, podcasting became mainstream in 2004. In 2006, 10 million podcasts were downloaded. That's 2 years after podcasts really became available for people. 10 million podcasts just in that year. 1 million podcasts were downloaded each month in 2012. Now, it's higher now, of course, but that 1 million podcasts downloaded each month, that number was double of what it was in 2010. So it's very interesting just to see that growth within podcasting. So as we move forward in podcasting, the question really is, are there jobs in podcasting? And you're going to discover this as we talk about it more, or as you start listening to podcasts or understanding just that whole process. Yes, there's jobs. There's jobs everywhere. And so many things take to podcasting or could be considered a podcast. You know, you can get podcasts through your Apple TV or your Roku box. I don't know if any of you have either one of those. I have a Roku box and I live and breathe off of that thing. We don't have any cable or anything anymore. We got rid of our DirecTV and we use our Roku box. And I can get TED Talks. I can get Twit TV on my Roku box and watch all of my podcasts through that box. So I'm watching it on my television and I have the option of using all my mobile devices and taking it mobile. There are many companies that are developing podcasts in many different formats, I guess. Not in formats, I mean, they appear to people to be more like a television show or more like a radio show where that's not the original intent of it. It's the way they're presenting it as an entertainment piece for people. So for some it's entertainment, for some it's education, and many companies are using it and going to it and trying to get ahead of all their competitors through podcasting. So use that as a start to where podcasting was, where podcasting is, and could potentially be going. Over the next few weeks, we're going to just dive into the thought process for starting a podcast. So we'll start talking about, things to think about if you're going to start a podcast to make sure it's successful. What are some of the planning pieces that go into it? And next week in class even, we're going to look at podcasting. I call it podcasting roadmaps. It's really what elements make up a good quality podcast. So I look forward to having more of these discussions with you guys and talking more about podcasting throughout the semester and really start recording it and doing your own podcast. So start listening to podcasts, subscribing to podcasts that are of interest to you, whether it's through a feed reader, through iTunes, even through YouTube. Start listening to podcasts, start finding things that are of interest to you, and we'll keep talking more over the next few weeks.